So, greetings, everyone. I kept yapping on and on just now because I was reading a document, and for some reason, it either shut off or I did not realize that it's because I was trying to show 2 pages, right? Yeah. So that's what happened to me, folks. And I think I just did it again. Let me just check that. No, it's still good. So what I was reading from the a document that I found online and can be found online, the Crown's fiduciary obligation toward Aboriginal peoples, right? And the crust of it is that when you're stopped up by the police or anybody who tell you you have to do this, you have to do that, they're acting as the crown, and that's impersonating someone else. It's fraud. Okay, so you need to ask them the delegation of authority, right? So I was reading from certain cases, but they were talking about they switch, and it's very tricky. They switch over to First Nation, which is different from Aboriginal people. Okay, the Aboriginal people are the people that look like me. Now, First Nations, it's under the federal when Canada started, because obviously you can't be Aboriginal to Canada when Canada was just created, not too long ago. So that's where we're at, folks. So, and also Quebec claims they have a autochtone Quebec, which would mean that autochtone to a piece of paper, because Canada is a fiction and so is Quebec. So when you on the land was here a very, very, very long time, and people call it whatever it wants to call it. Before Quebec was called Quebec, it was called New France. So were there First Nations of New France or autochtone of New France? So these are the issues that people are not understanding. I'm not saying everybody now does not have a right to the land or to have resources from the land. However, these are just facts you have to deal with, that the true Aborigine or First Nations have been denied their birth and blood rights, which is under galactic law and the laws of nature. These apparatus that they're using when they use the term like banned, First Nation ban, and so forth, banned does not apply to those people of the land. It is like a branding, okay? So like kind of like Nike branding for Nike. So the band is like a brand for Quebec or Canada. Are you seeing where I'm going? So I was talking earlier a little bit about what happened to my friend when she was pulled over. She was a bit nervous. However, I recorded the whole conversation because we were on the phone. So for the future, I might have something to expose that. However, right now I just wanted to read a little bit from this document. And there's an introduction part, but I'm going to page 4.2. And it says, in keeping with common law jurisprudence relating to fiduciary obligation applicable to the commercial mainstream. Again, when they say commercial mainstream, that tells you that they're doing contract, right? The Supreme Court of Canada in Gruen confirmed that the fiduciary obligation related to this exercise of Crown authority and discretion in a manner consistent with those equitable principles which require fiduciary to act with the utmost of loyalty to its principle, right? So the principle, who's the principal? That's the Aborigine, right? But they're relating it to a banned organization that is part of Canada construct, right? The best interest of the Aboriginal people should come first. The principal or beneficiary, That's Dixon J, as he then was. So it's then is now, right? So described the Crown's fiduciary duty as follows in context of Crown's post-surrender scenario. Through the confirmation of the Indian Act of the historic responsibility which the Crown has undertaken to act on behalf of the Indians so as to protect their interest and transactions contract with third parties. Okay, so the police is a third party. Okay, the court is a third party, right? Parliament has conferred upon the Crown a discretion to decide for itself where the Indians' best interests really lie. Okay, emphasis added. Further in discussion, the source of the Crown's fiduciary duty, Dixon J, underscores the discretionary nature of the Crown's authority, whereby the statute, agreement, or perhaps by unilateral undertaken. Unilateral means a one-way contract. One party has an obligation to act for the benefit of another, and that obligation carries with it a discretionary power. The party thus empowered becomes a fiduciary. So the empowered Crown was the fiduciary, right? That they took over everything, the gold, everything, the thief, everything. Equity will then supervise the relationship by holding him to the fiduciary strict standards of conduct. So in equity, we are to impose and enforce the law, right, of who you are and what has to be done in honor of this fiduciary relationship, right? So in spite of the strict standard of conduct imposed onto the Crown, Dixon J held that the Crown could not ignore the terms which Musqueam, that's one of the group of the bands, which has nothing to do with Aborigine, because they switched it up and said First Nation or other terms, which it's not the same definition. So you have to go and read that. I'm just going to where it's the crust of the thing. Musqueam directed and understood would be embodied in the lease on their behalf. It says it was lease of lands, so-called crown lands, right? Now, our ancestors would never be pushing for leasing and contracting lands like that. Okay, there were grants to do agriculture, etc. Totally different. This now they got into contract and violations of our people and our birthrights and blood rights. Okay, he reasoned that Musqueam representations or instructions to the Crown concerning their preferred terms of lease inform and confine the field of discretion within which the Crown was free to act, such that it was unconscionable to permit the Crown simply to ignore these instructions. He concluded that such unconscionability was the key to a finding that the Crown breached its fiduciary obligation. That's in the case of the band and so-called First Nation. Now there's even a bigger breach of obligation because our rights were ignored, and we were even doctored on paper genocide, to be called Black, Colored, Negroes, Caribbean, where all these different terms, and etc. etc. So then it says here, equity will not countenance unconscionable behavior in a fiduciary whose duty is that of utmost loyalty to his principle. It's supposed to be loyal to your principle. We are the principle, the true principle. Okay? It is clear that the court analyzes wherein holds the Crown no less accountable to the strict ethnic. Now that you change it to ethnic ethics of the utmost good faith, loyalty, and diligence which is imposed on fiduciaries exercising discretion within the commercial mainstream. Again, commercial. We didn't do any commercial agreements, right? Again, that was their own treaties they made among themselves to switch up and become the principal. But you cannot be a principal living on reserved crown lands. Check. Okay. Indeed, the obligation of the crown is more onerous or onerous than that owed to other beneficiaries. Aha! Other beneficiaries. Who are these other beneficiaries? Because the fiduciary duty of the crown is now entrenched in Section 35 of the Constitution Act 1982. That duty embraces a constitutional dimension, one which specifically limits and directs the crown's legislative capacity, placing upon the crown the burden of justifying any infringement of an aboriginal right. In Sparrow, the Supreme Court of Canada reasoned as follows. Now let me let you know this. The Supreme Court of Canada, after calling them, said they are not, I repeat, competent on nationals or people of the land, I should say, rights. They're not competent to deal with it, meaning they don't have the international authority, the authority on the land. They're a de facto organization, right? We find that the words recognition and affirming, this is from the so-called Supreme Court of Canada, because the real Supreme Court are the people of the land, the matriarchs. We find that the words recognition and affirmation in Section 35 incorporate the fiduciary relationship referred to earlier, and so import some restraint on the exercise of sovereign power. Accordingly, the Crown's fiduciary obligation towards Aboriginal people is not simply a common law duty which implies to government officials administering Aboriginal lands, chattel, and resources. It is also sui generis duty embodied within our Constitution, which holds the Crown to a high standard of honorable dealing where, as the court points out, the honor of the Crown is at stake. The Crown's fiduciary obligation relates directly to the question of what comprises legitimate regulation or legislative curtailment of a right, and any definition of the Crown's obligation in this regard must be informed by this constitutional imperative and constraint. Okay? This distinguishes the Crown's fiduciary obligation towards Aboriginal peoples from any other fiduciary obligation imposed at law or in any other context. Let me repeat that. This distinguishes the Crown's fiduciary obligation towards Aboriginal peoples from any other fiduciary obligation imposed at law or in any other context. Now, to say this, the Crown does not exist anymore. However, there are pirates on the land using the Crown's authority and not even knowing that they're committing fraud, some of them. There are some police who are hiding and refuse to do what they're told to do. However, there are some who just wants a paycheck. So there is where I end this communique. And I wish you safe journeys on the land. Freedom at last. All right? So use your discretion and prepare. Have documents and ask the police questions. Do not let them trap you into answering their questions. Keep asking them questions like, Can you provide your delegation of authority? Do I have contract with you or the crown? Does the crown have a contract that is valid? Stuff like that. And ask to speak to the superior who knows law. Are you aware of the laws of the land? Do you have authority to administer over, as an official, over the Aborigine on the land? Peace and love, folks. Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of holiday. Enjoy. Keep your mind on a positive, high vibrational stream, like just pass the light on. Keep it moving. Peace and love.